Hello, my name is John Smithin, and I'm the Executive Co-Director of the Aurora Philosophy Institute here in Aurora, Ontario, Canada. With me today is Ronen Grunberg, Vice President Technology of the API, and this is the final episode of the Philosophy Discussion Program for 2023-2024. Ronen, I want to go back to the slide from which we started 8 months ago, with the controversial philosopher Ayn Rand standing on one foot, as she famously did on one occasion, and summarizing her entire philosophy in a couple of minutes. Rand said that her metaphysics is objective reality. Her epistemology was reason. Her ethics was self-interest, and her politics, in the sense of political economy, was laissez-faire capitalism. So, Ronen, after 8 months, where have we got to with this?
Well, even if we were in broader agreement with the metaphysics and epistemology, one of the main things we have tried to show in this series is that adherence to metaphysical realism in metaphysics and reason in epistemology does not necessarily lead to the same conclusions on ethics and politics. So, in the last couple of episodes on ethics, for example, we questioned whether the notion of self-interest, interpreted as pure selfishness, greed, or whatever, was really what Ayn Rand wanted to suggest. Maybe she did, but we've suggested that a goal of self-realization or human flourishing would be a more attractive alternative. Eudaimonia must clearly be agent relative. This is a key point because this goal is not conducive to collectivism, but it would allow for different people to put different weights on the various human goods in their own individual spheres of interest. There would be no need to follow any particular party line. Anyhow, the purpose of today's discussion is to touch on politics in the sense of political economy or political philosophy. So, John, you are a professional economist. So how should we respond to laissez-faire capitalism?
Well, Ronan, I don't know about the epithet professional anymore. I have morphed into something that might be called a philosopher, the economist. Now, you won the Philosopher King Award. That's a real award that we get a couple of years ago that was bestowed on you by Community Affairs Director John Cummings. So my position, philosopher economist, is a couple of pay grades below that. But I'm happy with it. Economists started out as philosophers originally, and I think it's wholly right, to get back to that situation. Anyhow, our next slide, which we're going to show in a minute, shows three wise persons. Now, I cannot say three wise men because one of them is Ayn Rand again, and I don't want to dispute either her wisdom or her femininity. Excuse me. What we have here on the slide are Karl Marx, John Maynard Keynes, and Ayn Rand herself representing the various alternatives. Now, I'm a Keynesian. Indeed, I've been called on several occasions a radical Keynesian. So I can hardly agree with Ayn Rand on this one, on laissez-faire capitalism, even though I do support, metaphysical realism. Anyway, as to, laissez-faire, laisser is a French verb meaning to leave, and faire means to do. Laissez-faire therefore means something like to leave well alone. But I would say that the use of the term capitalism itself in this context is highly misleading. People who use that term, in my opinion, think of it in a very shallow way, merely as a synonym for the market. There is no attempt, really, to investigate whether there does or does not exist a complete social system which answers to that description, invoking a distinct entity called capitalism. So the idea is simply that under laissez-faire capitalism, that there should be no what is called government interference in the market, there would be a so-called free market, i.e., there would be no economic policy at all. Now, certainly economic policy can be very bad, and often usually is very bad. In Canada, I think it's fair to say that it usually is very bad indeed.
Mm-hmm.
But the idea that there should be no policy, not even to the extent of legal parameters setting the rules of the game and such like, makes no sense. And it makes no sense because it's not based on any plausible social ontology. Do you want to elaborate on this concept of social ontology?
Yeah, thanks, John. Yeah, I agree. Social ontology highlights the fundamental structures and interactions within society. And it emphasizes that social entities and phenomena, including economic systems, are shaped by complex social dynamics. And the idea of no government intervention in laissez-faire capitalist system ignores the role of social structures in shaping economic behavior. Social ontology suggests that legal parameters are essential for establishing fair rules and maintaining social order. It basically argues that economic policy is guided by social ontology and should consider broader societal impacts and ensure, as much as possible, fair outcomes for people. So I would say that social ontology challenges the notion of complete laissez-faire capitalism by emphasizing the importance of social context and structures in shaping economic policies and outcomes. But I think, John, that you probably have a couple of things to add to this.
Well, I mean, in short, what you've said, social ontology is all important. I think, we can agree with that. But it's essentially missing from the analysis of advocates of laissez-faire. They seem to think of markets as operating solely, along the lines of barter exchange, of the model of barter exchange from neoclassical economics.
Mm-hmm.
You give me an apple, I give you an orange. But that model is completely unviable. It's certainly in the modern world, I believe it was always completely unviable. In particular, it ignores money. And it neglects the fact, as you were stressing just now, that money and markets are themselves social institutions. They, money, financial institutions don't just grow up on their own. They're not like a biological entity. They don't grow up on their own without any conscious input from those who participate in them or the society at large. They are
Mm-hmm.
themselves, you were stressing this, the product of the complete underlying system of social relationships. And inevitably, they build upon the other the social structures that come before them. Money itself, the law, governance, and so on. Um, so, yeah, money is the thing that I want to stress. Do you want to add anything to that, Ronen?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you with what you said and the importance of social ontology. In fact, I noticed that in the last edition of the Aurora Philosophy Journal, which is, by the way, available on the API website, you and Alan Marchenko have discussed all these issues and more in some detail. Now, as I read it, the intention was not to debate any particular issue of either macroeconomic or microeconomic policy, but to stress that the ontological spade work has to be done first before any policy discussion can take place. And again, this is really the idea of the philosophical order that we've talked about before. There was also some discussion in the paper of how social facts and social institutions function. The line in the sand here is basically that money is a form of social relation. So, John, what do you think is the big takeaway from those discussions?
Well, again, and this is the philosophical point. We probably need to get back to the basic idea that we've actually discussed many times, that social facts, social relations, and so on, including money, are real. Money is not just pieces of paper and so forth. They're real and they have causal effects. Yes, they're immaterial, but that does not prevent them from having causal effects on the uh, on the real world. I mean, it's obvious every day. Money has causal effects on the real world of production and so forth. And standard economic theory then has made a large philosophical mistake, if I can use that term again, a large philosophical mistake by focusing on the role of money as a supposed medium of exchange, which supposedly had its origin as a physical thing, like a lump of gold, right? People seem very happy if you have like a physical thing, in your hand, but not so. In reality, money is a social relation of indebtedness. And so, in the more realistic credit or claim theory of money, money is not thought of as a physical object and a banknote or a coin, or as represented, nor as somehow representative of pre-existing values. All it is an entry in a ledger, a system of accounts, or a
Mm-hmm.
balance sheet.
Mm-hmm.
And the purpose of those entries is precisely to record the various social relations of indebtedness, and the debts are incurred and paid off by balance sheet and accounting operations. And it's familiar to us for every day experience. That's what we do every day, isn't it? Shift money around our bank accounts and so forth. But you see, the point is that it is this system which allows economic activity to proceed at all. It's not just a question of bringing physical goods to market, and then trading them for other physical goods. It's very far away from that kind of idea. So, in short, and we won't pursue the argument in any more detail right now. In reality, things are more complicated than the standard approaches to economics and finance make out. The complications I'm talking about require the detailed philosophical investigation of the nature of money and other social relations. Once that has been done, it may well lead to different approaches in political economy. In our case, different than Ayn Rand would agree with, even among those who share the same metaphysical and epistemological commitments. The point is that economics is just one of the special sciences.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and each social science should have its own methodology. And once you understand that notion of the philosophical order, you can come to different conclusions on the substantive points, the ethics and the politics, even among those who share the same metaphysical and epistemological commitments.
Yeah, no, I totally see where you're coming from. Social ontology suggests that economic phenomena are deeply intertwined with social structures. And that is an important thing to understand. And the fact that they are intertwined with social structures and relationships challenges simplistic economic models. Now, Keynesian psychology, for example, recognizes the importance of psychological factors in economic decision making. The way the person is interacting with the economy and their particular psychology has an impact on what they do. The person's expectations, their sense of confidence, their subjective self is not independent of economic things that happen out there in the world. So this notion that emphasizes the need for a nuanced understanding of money and social relations, that goes beyond traditional economic paradigms. But neglecting social ontology in economics can lead to oversights in economic analysis. I think this is a point you would probably agree with, John.
100%.
And we see this with some economists who completely neglect the psychological part of economics. Now, Keynes's insights into psychological aspects of economic behavior, I think, highlight the need for a more holistic approach to economic theory. And basically what we need to do, I think, is investigate the nature of money and social relations from a social ontology perspective because it can uncover complexities that are overlooked by standard economic approaches. And by integrating social ontology and Keynesian psychology into economic analysis, we can basically develop more comprehensive and accurate models of economic behavior and outcomes. What do you think, John?
Well, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I could not agree more. And at a certain level, I've been doing this for more than 40 years. So I'm bound to agree with what you say. But I think it's important, to understand that we can agree on the underlying philosophical issues, metaphysics and epistemology, and still have as you say, a more nuanced discussion. Like it doesn't. Once we've decided that we're metaphysical realists, and once we've decided that we use reason, right? You can even use reason to investigate these psychological factors that you mentioned. That I think that's an important point. I'd like to just switch gears a little bit now,
Mm-hmm.
because the title of this talk, which involves something like globalism versus economic nationalism. The title of that talk brings up, I think, what is in some ways really the burning issue of the day, our present day, and which seems to lie, if I'm honest, behind all of these terrible world conflicts that plague us in the present day. I mean, we're in a world in which there's conflicts going on all around us, and we're very afraid that there will be conflicts to come, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, and I think the thing that lies behind all of this is precisely the struggle between globalism and economic nationalism. In the USA, there's this slogan, MAGA, Make America Great Again. Now, perhaps this is not directly relevant to us here in Canada, but honestly, when I go and talk to people in everyday life, they seem to be very concerned with this, even though it's not specifically Canadian. It's not specifically Canadian. But as we all know, it's beyond contentious. This is the contentious issue of our days, and it is what it is what everyone seems to focus on and argue about on the internet, on the TV, in the media, in coffee shops. You and I
Mm-hmm.
were at breakfast with some people the other day
Mm-hmm.
where these things came up, right? Anyway, this is the world of actual politics, and I don't really want to stray into actual politics, because it's a minefield. But to get back to the relatively sane world of political philosophy, I'm perhaps making a big assumption there as well, the relatively sane world of political philosophy, is there any way that philosophy can give us a handle on these key issues?
Well, you made up a four quadrant diagram, and I'm just going to very quickly try to describe and explain it the way I understand it, and then you can perhaps highlight it a little bit more. So the diagram contrasts two broad approaches to international economic relations: a globalist and a nationalist approach. The globalist perspective prioritizes international cooperation and integration, while the nationalist perspective prioritizes national interests and sovereignty. So within each approach, there are variations based on economic ideology. On the globalist side, international socialism represents a globalized socialist approach, while globalization represents a more market-oriented globalist approach. On the nationalist side, National Socialism represents a nationalist socialist approach, while the question mark suggests uncertainty or variability in nationalist market-oriented approaches. The diagram really represents four distinct options or ideologies for organizing international economic relations. They range from globalist socialism to nationalist enterprises. Now, each quadrant represents a different combination of globalist, nationalist, and socialist enterprise perspectives, but really this highlights the diversity of approaches within the realm of international economic relations. Now, the most interesting quadrant for me, of course, is the one with the question mark. There are a couple of possibilities as to what can go there. So that bottom quadrant with the question mark combines, I think, nationalist views with market-oriented economic ideology. So it emphasizes, it seems to me, national interests and market-driven policies. And this approach, basically, as I understand it, acknowledges social ontology's role in shaping economic policies and outcomes at the national level. John, does that make any sense? Am I reading it correctly?
No, I think you are, and the terms in the northwest quadrant, northeast quadrant, and southwest quadrant, right? In a sense, self-explanatory. For example, in the northeast quadrant, that represents, let me put it this way, an ideology that was prevalent in Germany in the 1930s
Mm-hmm.
and 1940s.
Mm-hmm.
For example, international socialism. Well, when Marxism began, there was socialist internationals, three, four, five. So it's clear where this historical notions come from. Um, Globalization is the thing which is affecting us in the present day, and which
Mm-hmm.
some people would argue, have led to, for example, in our country, losing our manufacturing base and losing jobs, and everything is made abroad, not domestically in this country. That kind of thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, there is there's a question mark for the label of the southeast quadrant, and that's really unfortunate because it seems to me anyway to be the only option that we have left for the promotion of an open society in the domestic economy or in the national environment. I'm using the philosopher Karl Popper's term, open society. I talked earlier about and you talked earlier about the social ontology and the importance of the credit theory of money, and this what is it, southeast quadrant, right, seems to be the international manifestation of this. It will require an extremely detailed monetary underpinnings, flexible exchange rates, sovereign currencies, rational decision makers in governments and central banks, i.e., kind of the opposite to what we actually have, in practice. I think it is important, though, that in the end, this solution embraces enterprise,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's capitalist in that sense, right? It is not socialist or communist in any respect. But 100% it rejects globalism of either the left wing or right wing variety. And that brings us back to today's struggle, if you will. Should our politicians be attempting to, in this country, in Canada, should they be actually pursuing policies of, quote, Canada first?
Mm-hmm.
Or should they be attempting to impose uh, international, elitist, if you will, solutions on the rest of us living here? In short, that final quadrant emphasizes local, and in this case, national decision making and cultures, and it does not. And I think that's the fundamentally, contentious point, right?
So, okay. So I hear you. So, John, given all that you've said, what should we call this fourth option, which seems to be the road less traveled? Should we call it economic nationalism? Should we call it monetary mercantilism? Should we call it capitalism in one country? What do you think?
Well, I've actually used all of them at one time and another. The monetary mercantilism sounds a bit, like too much like an economic theory, if you know what I mean. And then when you say nationalism, that tends to rub people up the wrong way, or some people up the wrong way,
Mm-hmm.
in today's world. So I particularly like the expression capitalism in one country, right? If even if the rest of the world is going to hell in a handbasket, could we not here in this country like forge our own way or forge our own destiny. That's the kind of point that's making. So capitalism in one country is a pun on Stalin's notorious socialism in one country.
Mm-hmm.
And specifically capitalism in one country, which would presumably would be, anathema to Stalin, is meant to refer to the prospects for a non-socialist domestic economy having the ability to control its own economic destiny by putting in place the appropriately expansionary and, people-friendly, economic policies. Um, as mentioned, the central government of the domestic economy must have its own sovereign currency and a floating exchange rate, or at a very minimum, a fixed but adjustable exchange rate. This is for technical reasons of international finance, which we won't go into. But the bottom line again is that money is very important. Control over the monetary system, control over your own money is very important. If you don't have that, you will have nothing. For example, think of the Eurozone in Europe, right? That seems like an excellent example for the present day, a very good example of what can go horribly wrong, if we don't have these kind of things.
Mm.
Anyway, we've talked enough. I think what I would like to do is I would like to know what other people think about this. Ronen, I'd like to thank you. I mean, we've done a whole series of these
Mm-hmm.
programs now. I hope that they've led to like a coherent argument, and I hope that in some sense we've made a contribution in that way. Do you have any final thoughts on what we've been doing?
Yeah, I think we have certainly brought out some things for people to think about, and I think that there's a lot of food for thought in this particular episode as well, and probably a lot of possibilities here for discussion and conversation. But this is it for this video, and I want to thank you as well, John. It's been fun to do these with
Yes.
you, and
Yeah.
hopefully we'll make some more in the future. Take care. Bye-bye.